Hi, my name's Allie Beck, and today we're going to be talking about revising word choice to address mood. I have my bachelor's in childhood education from the State University of New York at Plattsburgh. I got that in 2008. I also have my ELL endorsement from the University of Virginia, and I received that in 2017. I'm going into my 13th year of teaching, and I currently serve as department chair. Here's a little more about me. I love weightlifting. It's good for my mind, it's good for my body. It's a good time all around. In the middle is my dog, Kai. We adopted him in April. He has heartworms, but has a lot of energy, so it's tough to balance those two things. On the right of your screen, I love to sing. I've been singing in choirs, chamber groups, bands since I was 11 years old. Definitely good for my mind, my body, and my spirit. Now about my school and my students. I teach at Floyd T. Binns Middle School in Culpeper, Virginia, and we currently have 898 students. 53% of those are documented economically disadvantaged. However, if you compile the data from our feeder schools, probably the actual amount of economically disadvantaged is somewhere around 65%. As of last year, I have taught 2 sections of collaborative English 6 and 1 section of Tier 2 and ELL. What you see here, believe it or not, is going to be an integral part of our work today. So what I'd like you to do is to take 5 minutes and write descriptively about what you see here. There's no right answer, there's no wrong answer. Just take 5 minutes and write. So pause the video now and you can go ahead. Okay, finish the sentence that you're on, and we're going to move on. We are coming back to this as this is an important piece of the work that we're going to be doing together today. One of my favorite shows is The Office, and I can safely say that in terms of writing, this is what the first weeks of school feel like with my 6th graders.
Mechanic not speak English, but he know what me mean when me say car no go, and we best friend. So me think why waste time say lot word when few word do trick.
While it feels like that, of course, it's not actually like that. But over the course of a couple years, my co-teacher and I did find that when we would ask students to write, they would become visibly stressed. Some would outright refuse. Some you could just see the anxiety written on their faces. So we decided to approach it differently this past year. And what we asked them to do is to respond to the prompt. When a teacher asked me to write, I feel. And we gave them a time limit. We prefaced it, there's no right or wrong. We don't want you to worry about spelling, punctuation, none of that. We just want you to write. And I don't think that we were expecting them to be as candid as they were, but we were so glad that they were. 2 major themes came out of this that a lot of them mentioned that they didn't know what to write about, which told us that they weren't sure how to brainstorm. They weren't sure how to come up with ideas. And it was clear that they didn't know what the writing process was and what it wasn't. To them, and we had one student actually say this to us, they would write the first draft, try to make sure it was perfect, set it aside, and when asked to do a final draft, would write something completely different. And revision and editing to them were the same thing, which consisted of checking for capitals and periods. They didn't see the value in what they were being asked to do because they didn't know what they were being asked to do. From there, my co-teacher and I came up with a plan. The first quarter was spent on teaching the writing process. Here's what I expect of you, and being very explicit and being very specific. Not to the point of you have to write a 5-paragraph essay. No, that went out the window. We focused on meaning and putting on the paper what you want to say in the first draft. Just get it on the paper. Brainstorming, we did a lot of different brainstorming activities. And then we went on to revising and editing, and we're very clear about the distinctions. So that by the time they got to the final draft, they realized that it wasn't as bad as they thought it was. And that it was what they were actually being asked to do was completely different from what they had been asked to do. And that was what we covered in the first quarter. In the second quarter, we dove deeper into revision. And to first teach revision, we wanted to focus on elaboration through word choice. And we wanted to use mentor texts. So we wanted to expose our students to different types of writing and how authors use language. But we didn't want to spoon feed that to them. We wanted them to come up with, we wanted them to analyze. We wanted them to do the work so that there would be some engagement, some investment. And like a lot of teachers, I peruse Twitter pretty often, and Jennifer Gonzalez of Cult of Pedagogy had tweeted out about this TQE method. So I clicked on the link and listened to her podcast, and she had a guest, Marissa Thompson, who's a classroom teacher out in California. She's a high school teacher. And TQE, she came up with this method of analysis called Thoughts, Questions, and Epiphanies. And I've used it for the last 2 years, and it really, really revolutionized how my students talk to each other about texts and how they analyze texts that they've read. So when we do thoughts, questions, and epiphanies, your thoughts, now you can do 3 columns. I have my students do 3 columns, T, Q, E. But we're all grown-ups here, so you can set this up as how you'd like to. Thoughts, after you've read a text, your thoughts about the text consist of, what is something I want to remember or feel is important to share with others? Your questions about the text include, what are questions that I had while reading? What is something that I don't understand or want to know more about? And epiphanies. What is a great discovery that I made about the text? What is something surprising that I suddenly understand? And the beauty of this is because they've already written it down as they were reading the text, they now have something to share. They're not having to come up with something on the spot. And with the questions, they can ask questions of their classmates in small groups to try to make sense of what they're reading. They really work together to dig deeper into the text. It really has made all the difference in the world in my classroom. So we're going to try this. I want you to use TQE in the poems that you'll find in the folder and direct your thinking to words and phrases that the author uses to create mood. What is the feeling the author has created in the piece you're about to read? So we're going to do an example. This is from, Esperanza Rising by Pam Munoz Ryan. Aguas Calientes, Mexico, 1924. Our land is alive, Esperanza, said Papa, taking her small hand as they walked through the gentle slopes of the vineyard. Leafy green vines draped the arbors, and the grapes were ready to drop. Esperanza was 6 and loved to walk with her Papa through the winding rows, gazing up at him and watching his eyes dance with love for the land. The whole valley breathes and lives, he said, sweeping his arm toward the distant mountains that guarded them. It gives us the grapes, and then they welcome us. He gently touched a wild tendril that reached into the row, as if it had been waiting to shake his hand. He picked up a handful of earth and studied it. Did you know that when you lie down on the land, you can feel it breathe? That you can feel its heart beating? Poppy, I want to feel it, she said. Come. They walked to the end of the row where the incline of the land formed a grassy swell. So as I was reading this, the thoughts, questions, and epiphanies that came to me, I thought like one of my students. So a thought that I had was that Esperanza and her father have a good relationship. I just noticed that in the text, that she loved to walk with her papa, gazing up at him, watching his eyes dance. And the fact that she felt comfortable having a discussion with him tells me that she had a good relationship. Questions that I have. What does Papa mean when he says, you can feel it breathe? What does that mean? A lot of my students, some of whom are either English language learners or quite a few of them have specific learning disabilities in reading. Figurative language can be very difficult. So often they will ask questions like this. And epiphanies. Papa is thankful for the gifts that the land gives him. He says it gives us the grapes and then they welcome us. It tells me that he's thankful. He appreciates what the land is doing for him. And that's kind of how thoughts, questions, and epiphanies work. They do it as they're reading or after they've read a passage, and then we come together in small groups and talk about it. So when I do this activity in class, I assign groups to specific poems, just as you see below. I mean, obviously you fill in with student names or organize them however you choose to. So the next part of this is to identify the mood of the piece, and then what words support that mood? What language did the author use to convey the mood? So you're going to choose one of the poems that's in the folder, and you're going to use the thoughts, questions, and epiphanies to determine the mood of your poem. Indicate which words and phrases communicate the mood, and then indicate how it was communicated. Was there figurative language? Did the author use imagery? What did they do with those words to communicate that mood to the reader? So take a few minutes, select a poem, and we'll be back. So at this point, I want to talk a little bit about how this would go down in the classroom, or if we were in person. So you would be doing this in a group of people, and you would be doing thoughts, questions, and epiphanies together and discussing them together in your groups of 4 or 5 or however many you choose. You don't always have to have a thought, a question, or an epiphany. It's whatever jumps out at you. Essentially, this is annotation without calling it annotation. It's kind of a precursor. It's a scaffolded introduction to it. And if you're a Virginia teacher, this is definitely in line with the SOLs from 6 to 12. This is what they're expected to do as far as analysis goes. What you'll find in this next slide is examples that my students did. I had these poems blown up so that students could rotate among the poems with their groups. And to try to conserve resources, I put plastic. Actually, there were transparencies from back in the day I put them over so that the kids could write with wet erase markers also from back in the day. So as you can see, this is actually one of my collaborative classes, and they really took note of how the author was creating mood. In the left-hand example, if you notice, they circled the period, saying it makes it 10 times worse. And when I asked the student about it, I said, "What made you write that?" And they're like, "It's the end. There's nothing after it. It just stops." And it made the mood that much worse. In the right-hand example, I had a student that picked out a simile, stuck together like crazy glue. It shows how close they were. They picked up on the fact that it's, even though they lost, it's positive. They picked up on that mood. They laughed together. They did it together. They're grateful. They tried their best. This has a positive vibe around it, so to speak. Now, you have determined what the mood of your poem is right now. What I'm going to ask you to do to apply the knowledge of word choice is each poem has been assigned a mood, a separate mood. What I'd like you to do is look up synonyms for the assigned mood based on the poem you read. You can use an online or print thesaurus. You can type or write them down on the paper. That doesn't matter. Essentially, what you're going to be doing with these synonyms is you are going to change the current mood of your poem to the assigned mood shown here on the screen. Basically, you'll be revising your word choice or the author's word choice. So go ahead and open up the document that has the mood words. Select the mood word that is assigned to your poem. Take as much time as you need. Pause the video now and look up the synonyms. So at this point, what I would ask you to do, what I would ask my students to do, is using the adjectives that you brainstormed, revise the words in your poem to create the assigned mood. So if you had on paper, you want to create a loving mood. Parents' poem, you want to create a joyful mood. So on and so forth. What this does is it forces students to look very specifically at specific words because they can pick out what words communicate feelings. And they know what words to replace. So when it's scaffolded like this, students, and they practice enough, students can transfer that to their own writing. And because of the thoughts, questions, and epiphanies, they've already looked at other people's writing and they've done it with other students, so they don't feel alone in this. Writing has now become a collaborative process, which tends to put their minds at ease. Following are some examples that my students came up with. On Paper by Jacqueline Woodson. The first time I write my full name, Jacqueline Amanda Woodson, without anybody's help on a clean white page in my composition notebook. I know, if I wanted to, I could write anything. Letters becoming words, words gathering meaning, becoming thoughts outside my head, becoming sentences. Written by Jacqueline Amanda Woodson. This particular student was very creative with how he used his language. and where he inserted his synonyms. The first time I write my full name, Jacqueline Amanda Woodson, without anybody's help on a clean white page in my composition notebook. I know if I wanted to write with love, I could write anything caring. Letters becoming words, words gathering meaning, becoming tender thoughts outside my head, becoming thoughtful sentences. Love, Jacqueline Amanda Woodson. Just a few adjustments with the right word really changed the mood of this poem. And the same thing on the right-hand side with the way the student revised Ode to Teachers. This particular student really, instead of changing phrasing, using the words to change phrasing, this student added more specific vocabulary. Rage, horrified, scary, shook, fearful, deadly, and still achieved the same effect. And of course, we would share these with one another. So students have looked at published authors' mentor texts, and they've also looked at what their classmates have done. Now, this is where I ask my students, and where I'm asking you, return to the prompt that we worked on at the beginning of the presentation. Just like you did with these poems, where in your own writing can you use more specific language to make the mood of your piece clear? At this point, we would pull out the prompt that we've been working on, any piece of writing they've been working on, journal and what have you, and have them start working independently while we circulate and watch what they're doing and how they're doing it, and are available for questions. Because this is a scaffolded way to teach revision, they're more apt to take the chance. They're not scared to revise anymore. Instead, they see it more of a challenge, like something they can kind of compete with themselves with, rather than something they should be afraid of or don't feel they can. So that's all I have for you today. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to email me. My email address is on the first slide, and I will see you the afternoon or the morning of the 12th for a Q&A session. Thanks.